Good morning, everyone. Welcome to part 5 of my Proxmox course, and today it's going to be a short one. We're going to cover containers. It shouldn't take long, and I'm off to Glasgow to visit my son who's opened a new business up in Glasgow. So I want to try and get this done before I leave, but I'm really looking forward to a week up in the beautiful Scottish Highlands. Well, okay, on the edge of the Highlands. We'll take a trip or two in. So let's go. So containers, and it's Linux containers, not to be confused with, for instance, Docker containers. So the question is, what are they? A container is basically a virtual machine that has no kernel. I think that would be fair description. So it uses the kernel of the host machine, in other words, of the PVE node, the Proxmox node. So straight away that means it's Linux only. So first thing, Linux containers, as the name implies, are Linux only. Okay, they're nothing like Docker. So a lot of people are familiar with Docker because quite often you could get a Docker container given to you with some demonstration software, perhaps a monitoring tool or something, all pre-installed, pre-configured. They're not even similar. Okay, Docker is an application container, and they're brilliant. Docker containers are great, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to compare one with the other in any other sense than different. They are for different applications. So Linux containers contain a complete operating system minus the kernel, so they're always Linux. A Docker effectively contains a kind of chrooted, if that's a term you're familiar with, but a kind of chrooted environment, hopefully secure environment, where an application has most likely been pre-installed and pre-configured, and you can bundle it up and you can give it to someone, they can run it, and it's a great idea. So look at Docker by all means. But Proxmox does not administrate Docker. You have to be careful with thinking about what Proxmox is and what it isn't. Proxmox is effectively a management tool. So Linux containers exist. They're not part of Proxmox. Linux containers are part of Linux. But Proxmox gives you a lovely management interface for them. Virtual machines exist. They're not designed by Proxmox per se, but the beauty is Proxmox allows you to create them, to manage them, to migrate them, to live migrate them, which means running server can be moved from one host to the other, etc., etc. So you can run Docker on Proxmox, but you wouldn't be able to manage it through the GUI, is what we're saying. Okay. So that's basically a quick overview of containers, and I don't want to labor the point particularly. So why would you use containers and why would you use virtual machines? As I've sort of said previously, my knee-jerk reaction is just to build a virtual machine. But to be honest with you, with my cluster, my little 4-node cluster, which I only use for training and for self-teaching, that type of thing, they're pretty Mickey Mouse machines. So I seriously should be considering using containers because containers are less resource hungry than virtual machines. Okay, so they use slightly less disk space, they require slightly less CPU power, they require slightly less memory, and by the time you've got, let's say, 10 virtual machines versus 10 containers, that becomes quite noticeable. So really I should probably reassess my knee-jerk reaction and start using containers more frequently. Another nice thing about containers, but although to be honest with you, this applies to virtual machines as well, but there are a lot of turnkey solutions out there. There's actually a website called turnkeylinux.io, and that site has loads of pre-installed, pre-configured software running on Linux, which you can use to, in a way, a little bit like my description of Docker, an out-of-the-box working solution, a working version of Wordpress, for instance, a working MySQL database, that type of thing. So we will look at those. And the reason I mention them when I mention Linux containers is there are loads of templates provided within the Proxmox GUI that we can install. Okay, so I've mentioned it before, one of the not criticism, that's the wrong word. One of the things pointed out to you is that virtual machines have better isolation than the Linux containers. Linux containers share the kernel, so if there's an exploit for the kernel, then it's possible that one of your virtual machines could be compromised, and then they could pivot from that onto the other virtual machines, taking advantage of the same exploit, etc., etc. Okay, that's a vague possibility. Okay, and the other thing I think I've mentioned, kind of, but directly say, if you want to install Windows, you can't use Linux containers. But I think that was fairly clear, wasn't it? Okay, so those are just points to mention. So let's just get on with it, as they say. Let's nip across to the desktop, and here we're on, what are we on? Transam. So let me log in. Okay, so if you've installed PVE or Proxmox, then you presumably have been playing around with the window environment bit, with the web GUI. One thing I've done, by the way, if you just click on that little button there, it gets rid of the log below, which we haven't really discussed. So we can see here various, this machine hasn't been doing much other than updating packages. And if you choose a particular log and double click on it, it will actually open a window, and you get two windows. One of them is the output. Oh, right, okay. My update failed for some reason. And status tells you, the time that it occurred and stuff like that. It says it was stopped, so the chances are I probably took the machine down or something. But I've just moved the log out of the way for the time being, so that we can have a little bit more screen space. Okay, so before we actually start creating this container, we need to choose what exactly we want to do with it. All right, and we need to use a template, which is a tar file or a compressed tar file with an image of an operating system on it, and possibly a pre-installed application. So to do that, we go to one of the nodes in the cluster. We go to the storage where we stored our ISO images, for instance, and we'll notice that there are additionally CT templates. Okay, so if you look, there's container templates. Now, I've actually downloaded a few of these, but let's go and have a look and see what we can do. Now, for instance, you could find some templates on the internet and have a URL to a site with some container templates. Okay, so we could download from a URL, we could download from a file on our local disk, or there is a huge library of templates that is shipped as part of PVE. So if we have a look here, we've got CentOS, OpenSUSE, Debian. Well, I'm sure you can read, so I won't read out the whole list or we'll be here all day. But you can see there are a lot of templates already provided for you, and I do mean a lot. So remember, you've got turnkeylinux.io. It's worth visiting their site. They have some fantastic turnkey solutions for different things. So if we look down here, we've got file server. I don't even know what half these things are. A game server, GNU Social, whatever that is. What else have we got? Oh, Drupal, which I am familiar with. Ruby. MongoDB, so you can see there's a massive selection. OpenLDAP, so that you can interact or interface with Active Directory, etc., etc. So there's loads of them. I've already downloaded a load of them. So let's just pick one at random. Cake PHP. Download it. Okay, it should only take a few seconds. All right, and this is basically a template for a container. So it's effectively a complete install of the operating system, but without the kernel. That is now completed, so you can see it didn't take long. So having done that, let's now install or create a container. So create CT, So we can see here that we've got the name of the node where it will initially live. Our container ID, I've mentioned before, you can have container IDs or virtual machine IDs of pretty big numbers here. I suspect it's 65,535 maximum, but I could be wrong. I've never pushed it to that limit. But just to prove, I'll put 10,000 here. And I use those different ranges of numbers to indicate different types of objects, so virtual machines versus containers. And you could use them to indicate a different site, etc., where this container would normally live, or this virtual machine. We've got to give it a name, so let's just call it CT-test1. Hopefully I haven't used that. Resource pool we haven't covered yet, but we'll cover later. Resource pool is just a collection of resources, so virtual machines, containers. Password, okay, and our public key. So we can actually upload our public key, and if you click on this load SSH key file, then you can navigate to your .ssh directory, and assuming you've run ssh-keygen and created yourself a pair of keys, you can upload the public key to here, and then you won't need to use a password to log into this container. Okay, we can demonstrate that later. I don't want to muddy the waters by looking at things that are a different topic. Okay, where do I want to store it? Well, I'm going to store it on my Kukang VMs, which is my storage for virtual machines, and the container is a kind of virtual machine. And this is where I can choose a template. So what have I got? I've got Drupal, Cake PHP, Turnkey File Server, WordPress. Let's just choose WordPress. Choose WordPress. Next, WordPress is just a content management, a content creation software, which is actually pretty good. This size, well, if we were going to start storing loads of websites on there, we'd probably want that to be a bit bigger. And that would be in the root file system, which is effectively a kind of virtual file system. So notice we're not giving this container disks in the same way that we did with virtual machines. What we're giving it is storage area on the node upon which it is running. Okay. We can enable quotas, we can enable access control lists, things like that, but let's just go with the defaults at the moment. Actually, did I? Yes, I've just gone back to general. I forgot to mention we can actually make this by default an unprivileged container. Okay, what that means is that this effectively, if I untick that, so it's now a privileged container, then this container would have much more access to low-level parts of the kernel than it would otherwise. So from a security point of view, always run as an unprivileged container, unless you have a very good reason for needing to have low-level access. For instance, to access hardware directly, like a GPU or something like that. Okay, so CPU cores, well, let's give it 2 cores. Memory, let's give it, I don't know, let's give it 2 gig of memory. Swap space, let's just leave it at 512. These are interesting. We could have a huge discussion about how much swap space you should have, etc., etc. We would hopefully never use swap. If we're using swap, then we haven't got enough memory. So if you've got an application where you're concerned about performance running on a server and it's using swap space, in other words, it's paging a lot, then you would get a dramatic performance improvement by adding more physical memory. So this is our virtual memory, 2048. So if we found out that 2 gig was causing us to page a lot, then we could simply increase that, okay, increase the amount of memory that we had available to us. And then network, we'll be using a virtual network interface, ETH0, connected to VMBR0. We're going to just go for automatic MAC address. We can use DHCP. Bear in mind we'd need a DHCP server, which if this is a home network, we probably do have. So I can't be bothered to mess about putting in numbers here. We've done enough of that. So IPv4, we're going to go with DHCP, which means my router or my gateway will actually give it an IP address. We could do the same with IPv6, but I don't have any IPv6. We do not want to change things such as the maximum transmission unit, which will be 1500 bytes by default. We just leave that as it is. We do not want to rate limit this machine, but we could do if we chose. We're not going to use VLANs in my example. A VLAN is a virtual local area network and can be used for segmenting your networks. If you've got a managed switch of any complexity at all, you can create VLANs, which are really neat from a security point of view, and isolating one set of traffic from another, etc., etc. But we're just going to keep it simple at this stage, okay? These are all things we could add later. So for instance, later on I could go in and change this to be on a different VLAN. Next, and then DNS, we're just going to say, just use whatever the host is using. It makes sense to me, but we could in here put different settings. And then finally we'll confirm, click on finish. This will take a second or two, so I will pause for a second. That took a minute or so. How long it takes? It's actually typically fairly quick compared with installing Ubuntu on a virtual machine, for instance. But it took a couple of minutes or so, and it appears to have succeeded. I thought one of my dogs had walked in. Status: electric fence. I haven't updated you on the electric fence. Later. Okay. Put it this way: the dogs don't go anywhere near the sheep anymore. I feel a bit guilty, but never mind. I'd rather that than arguments with the farmer or dogs being harmed by the farmer, who's a bit of an aggressive chap. Okay, so there we go. We've now got on Charger a container, which is called, I forgot what I call it. There we go, container test 1. So if we have a look, we've got, instead of having hardware, which we do on VM virtual machines, we've got resources. Now we can edit this, so we can go in and we could increase the amount of memory, we could change the swap size, we can change the number of cores in our CPUs, number of CPU cores, and we can actually do things like move the disk from one storage to another, which I occasionally have to do. I create a virtual machine or a container, and I suddenly realize, oh dear, I've put it on the wrong, I didn't mean to put it there, I've put it on local storage, for instance, so I'm filling up my local disk, which also means if I migrate this virtual machine or this container, it's going to take forever, because it's got to copy off the local disk of this machine to the local disk of the remote machine. So you can go select your storage, go to volume action, and you can move your storage, or you can resize it, which is cool. So if you suddenly realize, you know what, I need more space than that, you can actually change it. And then we've got lots of other sections: network, DNS, options. I'm just thinking of the ones we tend to change the most, or we're most likely to change, is probably resources or options. And in options we can, I mean, for instance, the classic one, and there was a tick box which I think I must have skipped over, but do I want this to start at boot? And I might say yes. What that means is if I boot Charger, will this start up? So by ticking that box, it now says yes, and it will do. Okay, etc., etc. So that's pretty cool. What else is there here? A backup we haven't covered yet, we will cover. Okay, snapshots are a really cool idea. The idea of a snapshot is that you basically say, right, take a snapshot, and you say, at this point in time, the disk is in a state that I'm happy with. And then what happens is the system will preserve or keep copies of any changes that are made. Or more to the point, it keeps copies of the original data and the changes. And that means you can revert back to a point in time, which is really cool. The only problem is, at the moment, with containers, not with virtual machines, you can't take snapshots if your storage is not local to the actual node that you're on. So this is not currently supported on Proxmox. Hopefully that will come in a later release. Okay, and then you've got firewall, we've got backup, which is, we can take a backup of our container, which is like a similar to a snapshot, except it's a lot bigger. So let's take a backup. We can either do snapshot, or we can suspend the container, or we can stop the container. So a snapshot is actually a live backup, which is fine because we're not actually doing anything with this machine at the moment. So let's just click on backup. This will not take very long, but again, I'll pause for a second to save boring you to death. Actually, there was no point in pausing. It took very little time at all. So, okay, we couldn't take a snapshot. The reason being is we're using remote storage, NFS storage, but we could take a backup. So that was a good idea because we're now going to play, well, we're not, but we would in a real world to go away and play with our new Wordpress installation, and we can revert back to a known good state quite easily. So that was a quick rundown of these windows. I strongly recommend that if you possibly can, build yourself a single node Proxmox cluster. It's not really a cluster, but you know what I mean. And just play around with all these settings because they're incredibly easy to use. So let's go to the console. Let's click on Start Now. Okay, now this particular template that we've used came from turnkey.io, linuxturnkey.io, and they have their own set of tools. So I don't really want to get sidetracked into looking at their tools particularly, but they will automatically configure WordPress for us. But it's worth going to, but you know, and it's fairly intuitive actually. They have their own front-end command tools, and maybe I should put the right password in, whatever that was. They have their own set of front-end tools for configuring whatever application they've given you a turnkey solution for. They're all very, very similar. So once you've played with them a bit, you find it relatively easy to do. So here we go. So, all right, this is WordPress. So WordPress typically uses MySQL, or MySquirrel, as Prime Gem would say, typically uses MySQL. So he's saying, okay, your MySQL administrator is going to be called adminer, or adminer, okay, and we need a password. So let's give it a password and click on, just hit enter. I think my password was okay. It's asking me to confirm. Now it's asking us for the admin account for WordPress itself. Going to give it the same password. Okay, confirm password. Okay, enter an email address. I'm just going to leave it at admin@example.com, but you know, here you would put your email address in. Put an example, what is the domain name of this WordPress? Because WordPress actually provides you with an HTTP server, so in other words, a web server. So what domain name is it going to be associated with? Okay, I've just gone with the default. And then you've got all sorts of additional features, which really I don't want to get into here because we're going down a turnkey Linux.io rabbit hole. But go and look at turnkeylinux.io, and you'll probably get completely sidetracked for a week while you look at all the amazing solutions they've got ready-made for you. Okay, so again, I leave it for you to go through all that lot. Okay, so talking about updates now, and WordPress has a slightly dodgy reputation when it comes to security, by the way, particularly to do with plugins, because there are literally hundreds of them, maybe thousands. And so every now and then one of the plugins turns out to have a security flaw. So security updates are a really good idea. So this is going to pick up from turnkeylinux.org. I thought it was .io. I'm sure it is turnkeylinux.io. I'm probably talking rubbish. Nothing new there then. Okay, it probably is turnkeylinux.org. We'll check in a sec. We've managed to fight our way through that. So we've now got WordPress installed. We've got a container installed. And I hope you found that useful. Okay. All right. So actually, let's go and have a look whether I'm talking rubbish. I could have sworn it was it'd be useful if I could spell turnkey Linux. I thought it was .io. No, it's .org. So correction, sorry guys, turnkeylinux.org. There you go. And as you can see, look at the choices. Fantastic. And this, by the way, that's a lot of choices, but then have a look down here. God knows what page number it goes up to. Amazing. So turnkeylinux.org. Okay, sorry about that. Right, that's it then. That's containers. What we're going to do next in our next session is HA. And another thing I want to cover is basically browsing the file system, finding our way around at the command line, because that's one thing I absolutely love about Proxmox. It's got a fantastic command line interface, and literally anything you can do in the GUI, you can do on the command line. All right, so thanks for that. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do subscribe and like and blah, blah, blah. I'm getting the hang of this YouTube thing now. So I'd really appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing you after I get back from Glasgow. And we'll move on with the next section. Bye, everyone.